The final assault on the Kethra Command Fortress was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it before the briefing even began. The fortress was built into the heart of an asteroid, protected by energy shields and reinforced walls, and 3 times as many defenders as the Coalition could muster. Command had calculated the odds. 94% casualties. Almost certain death for anyone who participated. A desperate gamble that might end the war if it succeeded, and would definitely end the attackers if it failed. The humans voted to go anyway. Kelveth stood in the back of the briefing room and watched as Captain Vasquez explained the situation to her soldiers. She laid out the numbers without emotion, described the defenses without exaggeration, made clear that survival was unlikely for any of them. Then she asked who wanted to participate. Every single human raised their hand, not because they were ordered to. Vasquez had made clear this was a volunteer mission, not because they did not understand the danger. The numbers were right there on the display. They volunteered because the Kethra were inside that fortress, and the Kethra had committed crimes that humans could not forgive. They voted to die because dying might mean victory, and victory might mean justice. The night before the assault, Kelveth walked through the human camp and witnessed something that confused him even more than their willingness to face death. They were happy. They gathered around small fires and shared food that they called comfort meals. Simple dishes from their homeworld that reminded them of family and safety and love. They passed around bottles of liquid that made them laugh and sing. They told stories about their lives, their homes, the people waiting for them back on Earth. A young private named Marcus Chun sat with a group of friends, showing them images on a small device. His wife, his daughter, his parents. He spoke about them with such warmth that Kelveth felt his heart's ache and sympathy. "She is 3 years old now," Chun said, pointing to the image of his daughter. "She started school last month. She wants to be a pilot when she grows up. I told her to aim higher, maybe be a captain like Vasquez." His friends laughed and made jokes about his daughter commanding her own fleet someday. Chun smiled and put the device away. Tomorrow he would charge into almost certain death, and tonight he was laughing about his daughter's dreams. Private Torres found Kelveth standing alone at the edge of the camp and approached with his usual easy grin. "Commander," Torres said, "you look worried. That is supposed to be our job." "I do not understand," Kelveth admitted. "You know you will likely die tomorrow. How can you be happy?" Torres considered the question for a moment. "Because tonight I am alive," he said simply. "Tomorrow I might die. Yes. But tonight I am here with my friends, eating good food, remembering the people I love. Why would I waste these hours being sad about something that has not happened yet?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. A figurine carved from some kind of synthetic material, shaped like an earth animal with 4 legs and a friendly face. "This is a dog," Torres explained. "On Earth, dogs are our companions. They live with us, protect us, love us unconditionally. When their humans are in danger, dogs will fight to the death to save them. They are loyal beyond reason." He pressed the figurine into Kelveth's hand. "Humans are basically dogs," Torres said, grinning, "but smart. And with guns. Keep this, Commander. A good luck charm, in case I do not make it tomorrow. You can tell my mom I died doing something stupid and cool." Kelveth looked at the small figurine in his hand, then looked at Torres, then looked at the camp full of humans laughing and singing on the eve of their death. "I will tell her." He promised. Torres died in the first wave. The assault was everything the briefing had promised. 18 hours of corridor-by-corridor slaughter. The Kethra fought with the desperation of cornered animals, knowing that surrender meant facing human justice. The coalition forces pushed forward step by bloody step, paying for every meter with lives. Kelveth saw things during that battle that would haunt his dreams forever. He saw humans using their own bodies as shields, throwing themselves over grenades to save their comrades. He saw a sergeant named O'Brien hold a choke point for 40 minutes with a shattered leg and nothing but a combat knife, killing Kethra after Kethra until reinforcements arrived. He saw soldiers charge fortified positions with bayonets when their ammunition ran dry. Screaming war cries in a dozen different Earth languages, Captain Vasquez took a blade through the lung in the 14th hour of the assault. A Kethra warrior had gotten inside her guard, and the blade punched through her body armor like it was cloth. She should have collapsed, should have let the medics evacuate her, should have accepted that her fight was over. Instead, she shot her attacker in the face, then sealed the wound with chemical foam from her medical kit, and continued issuing commands for another 2 hours. "The mission is not complete," she said when a medic tried to force her to evacuate. "I will rest when the fortress falls." The fortress fell in the 18th hour. The Kethra commander, a massive insectoid creature covered in ceremonial armor, transmitted his surrender on all frequencies. His final words, before coalition forces took him into custody, would echo through the galaxy for generations. "We thought we understood humans," he said, his mandibles clicking in what might have been fear or despair. "We thought they were soft, emotional, easy to break. We were wrong. They are demons wearing flesh. They cannot be stopped by pain, by injury, by death itself. We surrender not because we are defeated, but because we refuse to fight things that should not exist." 3 months later, Kelveth sat in his quarters aboard the Starboard HFY and stared at the small dog figurine on his desk. The war was over. The Kethra Dominion had collapsed, its leaders facing trial for crimes against sentient life. The coalition was already beginning the long process of rebuilding, of healing, of trying to forget the horrors they had witnessed. But Kelveth could not forget. He had been ordered to write a report for Coalition Command, summarizing his experience fighting alongside humans. They wanted tactical assessments, strategic recommendations, practical observations about human combat capabilities. He had written 17 drafts and thrown away every single one. How could he explain what he had learned? How could he put into words the terror of fighting beside a species that treated death as an inconvenience, that could march for days without rest, that could function through wounds that would kill any other creature in the galaxy? How could he describe the horror of watching humans transform from laughing, joking, compassionate allies into instruments of absolute destruction when their loved ones were threatened? He picked up the figurine and turned it over in his hands. "Dogs," Torres had said. Humans were basically dogs, loyal beyond reason, willing to die for their pack. But it was more than that, Kelveth realized. So much more. Humans were not terrifying because of their endurance, though they could outlast any species in the galaxy. They were not terrifying because of their pain tolerance, though they could function through mortal wounds. They were not terrifying because of their aggression. Though they fought like cornered predators, humans were terrifying because they loved. They loved so deeply, so completely, so irrationally that they would march through wastelands and ignore their own dying bodies and tear apart empires for people they had never met. Their compassion extended to strangers, to aliens, to anyone they decided was part of their pack. And their wrath, when that love was violated, was infinite. Kelveth began to write his final report. "Do not make enemies of humans," he wrote. "Not because they are strong, though they are. Not because they are relentless, though they are. Not because they are capable of terrible violence, though they are. Make peace with humans, because when they love you, they will carry you through hell. And when they hate you, they will not stop until your species is a memory." He paused, looking at the figurine one last time. "I have fought alongside humans," he continued. "I have seen their kindness and their cruelty, their compassion and their wrath. I have watched them laugh in the face of death and weep for strangers they have never met. I have been carried on their backs through wastelands and protected by their bodies in battle. And I have learned true terror. It wears a smile and calls you friend. It jokes about death and sings while marching to war. It will share its last meal with you and then walk through fire to save your life. It will adopt you into its family simply because you stood beside it in battle. True terror is not the monster in the darkness. True terror is the small, soft-skinned creature that refuses to stay down, that keeps fighting long after it should be dead, that loves so fiercely that it will burn the galaxy to protect those it cares for. True terror is humanity. Kelveth finished his report and sent it to Coalition Command. Then he placed the dog figurine in a position of honor on his desk, where he would see it every day. Private Torres had asked him to tell his mother that he died doing something stupid and cool. Kelveth would find her when he returned to Coalition space. He would tell her that her son died a hero, carrying wounded allies on his back, giving his life so others could live. He would tell her that her son had taught an alien commander what it meant to be human. The capital fell to the Coalition forces on the third day of the siege, and the Kethra defenders fled into the underground tunnels that spread beneath the city like veins beneath skin. They left behind their wounded, their supplies, and their secrets. The humans found the secrets first. Kelveth was coordinating the cleanup of the Eastern District when he heard the screaming. Not the screaming of battle, which he had grown accustomed to, but something different. Something raw and broken and filled with a pain that went beyond the physical. He ran toward the sound, his four legs carrying him through rubble-strewn streets, past burned buildings and shattered vehicles, until he reached a large structure that had once been a processing facility of some kind. Human soldiers stood outside, and many of them were weeping. Hardened warriors who had marched through hell without complaint, who had fought through wounds that would have killed any Volcari, who had joked about death as if it were an old friend. These soldiers were standing in the street and crying like children. Kelveth pushed through the crowd and entered the facility. The smell hit him first. A terrible mixture of blood and waste and something chemical that burned his nostrils. Then the sight. Rows upon rows of cages, stacked from floor to ceiling, and inside each cage was a person. They were civilians from a dozen different species. Valkyrie and humans and others he recognized from Coalition worlds. They were thin, so thin their bones showed through their skin. They were covered in wounds that had been treated just enough to keep them alive. Many of them had missing limbs, missing eyes, missing pieces that had been carved away with surgical precision. The walls were covered in diagrams, anatomical drawings showing the internal structures of various species. Notes written in the clicking language of the Kethra. Charts tracking how long each subject had survived different procedures. The Kethra had been experimenting on them, testing how much damage each species could endure, documenting their findings with the cold efficiency of scientists studying laboratory animals. Kelveth felt his stomach heave, and he stumbled back against the wall. To keep from falling, in the center of the room stood Captain Vasquez. Her face was wet with tears, her hands were trembling at her sides, and she was making a sound that Kelveth had never heard from a human before. A low keening noise that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest around her. Human soldiers were moving through the cages, cutting locks, carrying survivors to safety, speaking in soft voices that cracked with emotion. Some of them had stopped to hold the hands of prisoners who were too weak to move, offering comfort in their final moments. "Captain," Kelveth said, and his voice came out as a whisper. Vasquez turned to look at him, and what he saw in her eyes made his blood run cold. He had seen humans in battle. He had seen their determination, their endurance, their refusal to accept defeat. He had learned to respect their strength and even to fear their capabilities. But he had never seen a human angry before not truly angry. Not like this. Vasquez's eyes were not the eyes of a soldier. They were the eyes of something older, something primal, something that had clawed its way up from the darkness of evolution through sheer bloody-minded fury. They were the eyes of a predator that had found its prey. They knew, she said, and her voice was flat, empty, terrible. They knew these were civilians. They knew these were innocents. And they did this anyway. For science. For curiosity. For fun. She turned away from Kelveth and walked out of the facility. He followed her, uncertain what else to do. Outside, the human soldiers had gathered. They were no longer weeping. Their faces had hardened into masks of stone, and their eyes held the same terrible light that burned in their captain's gaze. Vasquez addressed them without raising her voice. She did not need to. Every word carried like thunder in the silence. The Kethra did this, she said. They took our people. They took coalition civilians. Children, mothers, fathers. And they cut them apart piece by piece, just to see how long they would scream. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold enough to freeze stars. No mercy, she said. No quarter. No prisoners. They wanted to know what we are capable of. Let us show them. The humans roared. A sound that shook the air and echoed off the broken buildings. Then they moved out, spreading through the city like a tide of fury over the following days. Kelveth watched the tactical situation change in ways he had not anticipated. Human units that had previously fought with disciplined aggression now fought with something else entirely. They pushed forward recklessly, taking casualties they would have previously avoided, throwing themselves at Kethra positions with an abandon that bordered on madness. They did not advance, they pursued. They hunted Kethra. Prisoners began to disappear. Coalition law required that enemy combatants be processed and detained according to specific protocols. They were to be treated humanely, questioned lawfully, and held until the conflict ended. These laws had been written by the founders of the coalition as a sign of civilized warfare. The humans no longer seemed interested in civilized warfare. Kelveth found the first body in a storage room. A Kethra officer, cause of death listed as natural causes, despite the obvious signs of violence. Broken limbs, missing mandibles, a look of absolute terror frozen on its face. He found Captain Vasquez and confronted her about what he had seen. That prisoner was supposed to be protected, he said, keeping his voice calm with effort. Coalition law is clear on the treatment of captured enemy combatants. Vasquez looked at him with those terrible eyes. Coalition law, she repeated slowly. Tell me, Commander, does coalition law cover what they did to those civilians? Does coalition law address the vivisection of children? Does coalition law have a section on how to process the monsters who decorated their walls with anatomical diagrams written in innocent blood? That is not the point. Kelveth insisted. We are supposed to be better than them. We are supposed to represent something worth fighting for. Vasquez stepped closer. And despite being smaller than him, she seemed to fill the entire room. Let me tell you something about humans. Commander, she said, we have a capacity for love that most species do not understand. We bond with anyone and anything. We adopt strangers into our families. We feel the pain of people we have never met as if it were our own. It is our greatest strength. She paused, and when she continued, her voice dropped to a whisper. It is also our greatest weakness. Because when someone hurts the people we love, we do not respond with proportional justice. We do not weigh costs and benefits. We do not consider the political implications. We respond with wrath. Wrath, Kelveth repeated. Wrath, Vasquez confirmed. The anger of a species that has spent its entire history fighting to protect its own. The fury of pack animals who have watched their pack be harmed. It is not rational, Commander. It is not civilized. It is simply what we are. She turned away from him, The Kethra wanted to know what humans are capable of. She said as she walked toward the door, "They are finding out. I suggest you stay out of the way." Kelveth let her go. He stood alone in the empty room and tried to process what he had learned. Humans were terrifying because of their endurance. Yes, because of their pain tolerance, because of their refusal to accept defeat. But those were physical traits, biological accidents of evolution. This was something else. This was a choice. A deliberate decision to abandon the rules of civilized warfare in response to atrocity. A darkness that lived inside the human heart, normally buried beneath their smiles and jokes and compassion, but always there. Always waiting. The Kethra had awakened something they did not understand. And Kelveth was beginning to realize that he did not understand it either. All he knew was that he was grateful. Profoundly grateful that humans considered him an ally rather than an enemy. Because if they ever decided to hunt the Velkari the way they were now hunting the Kethra, his species would not survive. Not because humans were stronger or faster or more numerous, but because humans had something no other species possessed, the capacity for infinite wrath. The supply lines were cut on the third day of the campaign, and with them went any hope of easy victory. The Kethra had destroyed the orbital relay stations, preventing reinforcements from reaching the surface. They had bombed the roads and collapsed the tunnels. There would be no extraction, no resupply, no support. The only path was forward. 400 kilometers through a wasteland called the Ashfall Barrens to reach the besieged capital city where coalition forces were making their last stand. Kelveth studied the maps and felt his hopes crumble like ash. The barrens were irradiated from an ancient industrial disaster. The ground was covered in toxic dust that would eat through standard breathing filters within days. Temperatures swung from freezing at night to scorching during the day. There was no water, no shelter, no life. It cannot be done, he told Captain Vasquez during the command meeting. My soldiers are not built for extended marches. We are sprinters, not marathon runners. 400 kilometers through that terrain will kill us before we reach the halfway point. Vasquez looked at the map, then looked at her human officers, then looked back at Kelveth. Then we will carry you, she said simply. The march began the next morning for the first 3 days. Kelveth almost believed they might succeed. His soldiers kept pace with the humans, moving at a steady rate that ate up the kilometers without exhausting them too quickly. They traveled at night when the temperatures were bearable and rested during the worst of the day's heat. They rationed their food and water carefully. By day 4, his soldiers began to falter. The Valkyrie body was not designed for endurance. Their muscles were dense and powerful, perfect for bursts of explosive activity, but they burned energy at a tremendous rate. Their cooling systems relied on shade and rest, not continuous exertion. They needed more food and water than the humans, and their supplies were running low. Kelveth watched his soldiers struggle and felt shame burning in his hearts. Warriors who had fought with honor in a dozen campaigns were now stumbling like newborn hatchlings, their legs trembling, their breathing ragged, their eyes dim with exhaustion. The humans did not falter. They marched with a steady, relentless pace that never varied. They sweated constantly, their strange soft skin glistening with moisture that evaporated and cooled them. They talked and sang and told jokes, treating the death march like an unpleasant but manageable inconvenience. On day 5, Private Torres appeared beside Kelveth, still bearing the healing wound in his abdomen. The young human was carrying his full pack, plus an extra rifle and a container of water. Commander, Torres said, some of your soldiers are falling behind. We can slow down if you need. No, Kelveth replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. We must reach the capital. Every day we delay is another day. The defenders must hold without reinforcement. Torres nodded and fell back. An hour later, Kelveth turned to see the young human walking beside a struggling Valkyrie soldier, one arm supporting the warrior's weight, half carrying him across the broken ground. By day 8, more than half of Kelveth's soldiers were being assisted by humans. The small, soft-skinned aliens had distributed their supplies among the struggling Valkyrie and had taken on extra burdens without complaint. They walked with Valkyrie arms draped over their shoulders, supporting their larger allies step by step. Kelveth learned a terrible truth during those long days of marching. Humans were persistent predators. On their homeworld, they had hunted by simply following their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. A human could not outrun a deer or a horse, but a human could follow that animal for hours, for days, never stopping, never resting, until the prey simply gave up and died. The Valkyrie were the prey now. Not enemies to be hunted, but allies who could not match the implacable endurance of human biology. On day 12, a Valkyrie scout named Relkoth collapsed and did not get up. Kelveth knelt beside him and saw the light fading from his eyes. Exhaustion had claimed him, his body simply giving out after pushing beyond its limits for too long. "Commander," Relkoth whispered, "I am sorry. I could not keep going. You have nothing to apologize for." Kelveth replied, "You served with honor." Relkoth died moments later, his heart simply stopping. He was the first, but Kelveth knew he would not be the last. The humans gathered around the body and stood in silence. Captain Vasquez spoke words from her people's traditions, something about rest and peace and being remembered. Then they buried Relkoth beneath a cairn of stones and marked the location on their maps so his body could be recovered later. Kelveth expected them to move on immediately. There was no time to waste after all. The capital was still days away. Instead, Vasquez approached him and put one small hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, almost hot, a reminder that humans ran at higher temperatures than most species. "Take whatever time you need." "Commander," she said, "we will wait." They rested for 2 hours. Humans sat with grieving Valkyrie, offering water and food and simple presents. They did not speak much, but they stayed close, as if their nearness could somehow share the burden of loss. Then Vasquez stood and looked at the horizon. "We keep moving," she said. Not cruel, not harsh, just stating a fact. The universe did not care about their grief, and the defenders in the capital could not wait. They kept moving. By day 14. Humans were carrying Valkyrie soldiers on their backs. The small aliens had fashioned harnesses from equipment straps, and they bore their larger allies like children, step after endless step. Private Torres, still healing from his wound, carried not only his own pack but the packs of 2 Valkyrie who could no longer walk at all. He was humming a tune as he walked, some human melody that rose and fell in strange patterns. Other humans joined in, their voices creating harmony that echoed across the dead landscape. "How are you doing this?" Kelveth asked Vasquez on the 15th day. His voice was barely a whisper, his strength almost gone. "How can your people keep going when we cannot?" Vasquez smiled, though it was a tired smile now, stripped of its usual brightness. "We call it the second wind," she said. "When our bodies are exhausted, sometimes something happens. We push through the wall of fatigue and find more energy on the other side. It is like our minds refuse to let our bodies quit. We tell ourselves we can rest when we are done, and our bodies believe it. Your minds override your bodies," Kelveth said slowly. "We are stubborn," Vasquez agreed. "Perhaps the most stubborn species in the galaxy? We do not know how to give up. It is not in our nature. We have a saying, it is not over until it is over. As long as we are still breathing, we keep trying." On day 16, they saw the capital city on the horizon. Smoke rose from its towers, and the distant sound of weapons fire reached their ears. The defenders were still fighting. They had held. Kelveth looked at his soldiers. Less than half of them could still walk on their own. The rest were being carried by humans, who should have been just as exhausted, but somehow were not. The small aliens had carried his people across 400 kilometers of wasteland, never complaining, never stopping, never giving up, Private. Torres set down the Valkyrie soldier he had been carrying and grinned at Kelveth. Almost there. Commander, he said cheerfully. Told you we would make it. Kelveth looked at the young human, at his healing wound in his tired eyes and his unbreakable smile, and felt something he had never expected to feel: gratitude. And beneath it, a deep and abiding terror. These humans were not brave. Bravery implied the presence of fear to overcome. Humans simply refused to acknowledge physical limitation as a relevant concept. They had decided they would complete the march, and so they had completed it. They had decided they would not let their allies fall behind, and so they had carried them. What else, Kelveth wondered, might humans decide to do? And what in the galaxy could possibly stop them? The mining colony of Arcturus VII burned beneath him as the transport ships descended through the atmosphere, and Kelveth ripped his restraints with all four hands as anti-air fire exploded around them like deadly flowers blooming in the sky. The Kethra had been waiting for them. 3. Valkyrie transports were hit in the first 30 seconds. Kelveth watched through the viewport as one of them spiraled downward, flames pouring from its engines, its hull cracking apart from the stress. There was no way anyone could survive such a crash. Then he saw something that made his heart stop. Figures were jumping from the burning wreckage. Small shapes tumbling through the air with nothing but portable thrusters strapped to their backs. They fell like stones, then activated their thrusters at the last possible moment, landing hard on the rocky ground below and immediately taking cover. They were firing their weapons before their feet had even stopped moving. Humans. The transport had been carrying humans by the ancestors. Tethera whispered beside him, her scales pale with shock. They jumped from a burning ship. Yes, Kelveth replied, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Yes, they did. Their own transport landed hard, the impact jarring Kelveth's teeth and rattling his bones. The doors opened and he led his soldiers out into chaos. The colony was a maze of metal buildings and mining equipment, now filled with smoke and fire and the screaming of weapons. Kethra shock troops were everywhere, their insectoid bodies skittering across walls and ceilings, their mandibles clicking with bloodlust. Plasma bolts filled the air like burning rain. Kelveth's training took over. He began shouting orders, directing his soldiers to form defensive positions, to find cover, to regroup and assess the situation before advancing. This was proper military doctrine, the Valkyrie way of war. The humans did not follow proper military doctrine. Captain Vasquez emerged from the smoke like a ghost, her face streaked with soot and blood that might or might not have been her own. She took one look at the battlefield, raised her rifle, and began running directly toward the enemy positions. Forward, she shouted, and her voice cut through the noise of battle like a blade through flesh. Push forward. Do not give them time to dig in. Her soldiers followed without hesitation. They did not form defensive lines. They did not wait for support. They did not take cover. They simply attacked, pouring fire into the Kethra positions while advancing at a dead sprint. Kelveth watched in horror and fascination as the humans crashed into the enemy like a wave against rocks. They fought with rifles and pistols and knives and fists and teeth. When one fell, another stepped over the body and kept going. When they ran out of ammunition, they picked up enemy weapons and continued firing. A Valkyrie soldier beside Kelveth took a plasma bolt to the thorax. The young male looked down at the smoking wound in his chest, then looked at Kelveth with eyes that were already beginning to dim. It has been an honor, Commander, he said quietly, and then he lay down and died with the dignity of his people. Nearby, a human private named Torres took a similar wound to his abdomen. Kelveth saw the bolt tear through the soft human flesh, saw the blood begin to pour, saw the young man stagger and fall to one knee. Torres did not lie down. Torres did not accept his death with quiet dignity. Instead, Torres screamed. Not a scream of pain, but a scream of fury. He forced himself back to his feet, blood running down his legs and pooling in his boots, and he kept firing. He advanced on the Kethra position that had wounded him, still screaming, still shooting, dragging himself forward one agonizing step at a time. A human medic reached him and began applying some kind of foam to the wound. Torres did not stop fighting while she worked. He simply switched his rifle to one hand and continued firing while the medic sealed his insides back where they belonged. How is this possible? Kelveth whispered to himself. How is he still alive? The battle lasted another 2 hours. The humans pushed the Kethra back building by building, room by room. They took casualties that would have broken any Valkyrie unit, and they simply kept going. Kelveth saw humans fighting with broken bones, with missing fingers, with wounds that exposed muscle and organs to the open air. Private Torres survived. Kelveth learned later that the young man had lost nearly a third of his blood volume and had continued fighting for another 40 minutes before finally allowing himself to be evacuated. The medic said he had been conscious the entire time, asking when he could return to the fight. That night, after the colony had been secured and the surviving Kethra had been driven off, Kelveth found himself unable to sleep. He walked the corridors of the temporary base they had established, stepping over sleeping soldiers and medical equipment, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. He found Captain Vasquez sitting alone in what had once been a mining office, staring at a small electronic device that displayed images. She looked up when he entered, and for once she was not smiling. "Commander," she said. "Cannot sleep either?" "No," Kelveth admitted. "I have been trying to understand what I saw today. My soldiers died accepting their fate, as is proper. Your soldiers refused to die at all. I have never seen anything like it." Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Then she gestured for him to sit. He folded his long legs beneath him and settled onto a crate across from her. "We call it adrenaline," she said. "It is a chemical our bodies produce in times of danger. It dulls pain, increases strength, sharpens focus. It allows us to do things that should not be possible. Our ancestors evolved it as a survival mechanism, a way to escape predators or fight off threats. Your species developed the ability to ignore mortal wounds," Kelveth said slowly, "as an evolutionary adaptation. Among other things," Vasquez replied, "we are also persistence predators. On our homeworld, our ancestors hunted by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We are not the fastest or the strongest species on our planet, but we can run for days without stopping. We sweat to regulate our body temperature, so we do not overheat. We can go without sleep longer than almost any other mammal. We were built to endure." Kelveth felt something cold settle in his chest. The Valkyrie were sprinters, designed for short bursts of intense activity. A prolonged campaign would exhaust them quickly. Humans, it seemed, were designed for exactly the opposite. "You were built to outlast your enemies," he said. "Yes," Vasquez replied simply. "And Private Torres," Kelveth continued, "the one who was wounded in the abdomen. How long until he recovers?" Vasquez checked her device and smiled that unsettling smile. "He's already asking when he can rejoin the unit. The medics say he will be combat ready in 2 weeks, maybe less." Torres is stubborn, even for a human. 2 weeks. A wound that would have killed a Valkyrie in minutes. And a human would be ready to fight again in 2 weeks. Kelveth stood and made his way to the door, then paused and turned back. "Captain," he said, "I must ask, does it not frighten you what your species is capable of?" Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. "Every single day," she finally replied. "But fear is just another thing we have learned to ignore." Kelveth returned to his quarters and sat in the darkness for a long time. He had fought many enemies in his career, and he had always been able to understand them. The Kethra fought for territory and resources. Other species fought for honor or survival or revenge. These were motivations he could grasp, but humans fought as if death itself was an enemy to be defeated. They refused to accept the limitations of their own bodies. They kept going long after any sane species would have stopped. For the first time in his military career, Kelveth was afraid. Not of the enemy they had come to fight, but of the allies fighting beside him. Lieutenant Commander Kelveth Soren stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie cruiser, starboard him, and read his orders for the third time, hoping the words would change if he stared at them long enough. They did not change, and his two stomachs churned with a feeling he refused to name as fear. The orders were simple enough in their wording, but terrible in their meaning. His battalion of 300 Valkyrie soldiers would integrate with a human combat unit for the coming campaign against the Dominion of Kethra. And there would be no negotiation on this matter. Kelveth had served the Galactic Coalition for 12 cycles now, fighting in 7 major conflicts and countless smaller engagements. And he had earned his reputation as a commander of precision and discipline. His soldiers followed orders without question, fought with calculated efficiency, and died with quiet dignity when their time came. This was the Valkyrie way, and it had served them well for 10,000 years. But humans were something else entirely. He turned to his second officer, a young female named Tethara, whose scales still held the bright blue of youth, and he saw the same unease in her 4 eyes that he felt in his hearts. "Commander," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I have heard stories about the humans. My clutch brother served with them at the Battle of Nexus Prime, and he has not been the same since. Stories are often exaggerated," Kelveth replied. Though he did not believe his own words, "He told me they do not stop," Tethara continued, her voice trembling slightly. "He said they take wounds that would kill any reasonable species, and they simply continue fighting as if nothing happened. He said they smile before battle, Commander. They show their teeth like predators about to feed." Kelveth raised one of his 4 hands to silence her, not because he wanted to dismiss her concerns, but because he could see other crew members beginning to listen. And fear spread faster than plasma fire through a ship's corridors. "We are Valkyrie," he said firmly. "We have fought the Kethra before, and we have won. We will work with these humans because the Coalition requires it, and we will maintain our discipline and our honor, regardless of what strange behaviors our new allies might display. Is that understood?" "Yes, Commander," Tethara replied. But her scales had paled to a worried gray. The human transport ship docked with the starboard him 3 hours later, and Kelveth made his way to the airlock with a small honor guard to greet his new allies. He had reviewed the files on the unit he would be working with, and the information had done nothing to calm his nerves. They called themselves the 77th Terran Shock Infantry, and their unofficial name was far more disturbing, the unkillable according to Coalition records. This unit had suffered 94% casualties in a battle on the ice world of Cronus and had somehow managed to not only survive, but win. The survivors had been given medical treatment, merged with fresh replacements, and sent back into combat within 2 standard months. The Valkyrie military would have retired such a unit, given the survivors time to heal their minds as well as their bodies, honored them with ceremonies and peaceful positions. The humans had simply continued fighting. The airlock hissed open and Kelveth got his first look at the beings he would be fighting alongside. They were smaller than he had expected, standing only about 2/3 the height of an average Valkyrie. Their skin was soft and came in various shades of brown and pink, completely unprotected by scales or armor plating. They had only 2 arms and 2 eyes, which seemed like a terrible evolutionary disadvantage, and they moved with a strange fluid grace that reminded Kelveth uncomfortably of the hunting serpents from his homeworld. The human at the front of the group was a female with dark hair pulled back tight against her skull and skin the color of warm copper. She wore simple combat fatigues and carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had seen many battles and expected to see many more. She walked directly up to Kelveth and did something that made him take an involuntary step backward. She pulled her lips back and exposed her teeth. It took him a moment to remember from his cultural briefings that this was called a smile, and it was meant as a gesture of friendship, rather than a threat. Knowing this intellectually and believing it emotionally were two very different things. "Commander Soren," the human said, and her voice was surprisingly pleasant. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the 77th. We are looking forward to working with you and your soldiers." She extended one of her hands toward him, palm open, and Kelveth remembered this was another human greeting ritual. He reached out with one of his own hands and grasped hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong for such a small and fragile-looking creature. "Captain Vasquez," Kelveth replied. "Welcome aboard the Starboard HFY. I trust your journey was uneventful." "Uneventful enough," she said, still showing her teeth in that unsettling way. "Though my soldiers are getting restless. We have been traveling for 3 weeks, and they are eager to get back to work." Kelveth noticed that the humans behind her were looking around the Volcari ship with open curiosity. Several of them were also smiling, and one young male with pale skin and red hair was actually laughing quietly at something another human had whispered to him. They did not look like soldiers about to enter a war zone. They looked like travelers on an adventure, excited about what they might see and do. "Your soldiers seem to be in good spirits," Kelveth observed, uncertain whether this was a compliment or a concern. "They always are before a fight," Vasquez replied. "It is how we handle distress. We laugh, we joke, we tell stories about home. It keeps us human, if you understand what I mean." Kelveth did not understand, but he nodded anyway. Over the next several days, as the Starboard HFY traveled toward the contested Draconis Rift, Kelveth found himself observing the humans with the same fascination a scientist might observe a new and potentially dangerous species. They were loud. They filled the corridors with conversation and laughter that echoed off the metal walls. They gathered in groups to share meals and seemed to view eating as a social activity rather than a biological necessity. They played games with cards and dice, and small electronic devices that made cheerful blooping sounds. They also trained with an intensity that surprised him. Kelveth watched Captain Vasquez lead her soldiers through combat drills in the cargo bay, and what he saw disturbed him in ways he could not quite explain. The humans threw themselves at each other with barely controlled violence, grappling and striking and shouting encouragement. When one of them was knocked down, they simply got back up and continued. When one of them was injured, bleeding from a split lip or nursing a bruised limb, they laughed about it. "Does this not concern you?" Kelveth asked Vasquez during a break in the training. "Your soldiers are injuring each other." Vasquez wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and gave him another one of those unsettling smiles. "Minor injuries," she said. "They will heal. Better to bleed a little in training than a lot in battle. Besides, it keeps them sharp." A human who is not challenged becomes restless, and a restless human is a dangerous human. "I would think any human is a dangerous human," Kelveth said, and he meant it as an observation rather than an insult. Vasquez laughed, a sharp barking sound that made several nearby Valkyrie flinch. "Commander," she said, "you have no idea." She was right. He had no idea, but he was about to learn.